Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 445. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone, today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing well, Kyle. How are you?
Doing very well. Happy to have you back on the show. Connor, later this week, me and you will be in Memphis, Tennessee for Freedom Fest. So that is going to interrupt the schedule of the show. There may not be a third show this week. I was hoping to do one of our Port Fest talks, but I don't see those out yet. So for that reason, we may just not have a third show this week, or maybe we'll record something while we're in Memphis. Who knows? So keep an eye out on the feed, but if you don't see something, it's just because we are at Freedom Fest. Now, if you are in Memphis for Freedom Fest, please come say hi at the Libertarian Institute booth or table that we will have set up. I'm guessing it'll be somewhere with all the other organizations like we were last year. So Connor, looking forward to meeting some fans, some listeners out there in Memphis. And I just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version. And of course, you find anywhere the show anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And Connor, let's get into it. All right, so the first article, and the only article I have to talk about today, is one quick update on what's happening with the build-up towards war with China. And this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on July 9th. U.S. wants Southeast Asian nations to push back against China in South China Sea. A senior State Department official said Friday that the U.S. was looking at building relationships with Southeast Asian nations to push back against China in the South China Sea. Daniel Kittenbrink, the U.S. Secretary and the U.S. Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, made the comments when discussing Secretary of State Antony Blinken's upcoming trip to Indochina, where he will meet with foreign ministers from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, from July 15th to the 16th. And this is a statement from the U.S. official. In our view, it's not a matter of getting countries on board with the U.S. view. It's a matter of working with our ASEAN partners to advocate our shared view and vision for the region and to push back on behaviors that run counter to the vision and to those principles, including many irresponsible acts that have been carried out by China over the last several years and in the last several weeks. The South China Sea has become a potential flashpoint for conflict between Washington and Beijing. The U.S. has increased its military presence in the disputed waters and has pledged to intervene if the Philippines comes under attack in the area. China and the Philippines and several other ASEAN members have overlapping claims into the South China Sea. And Connor, of course, this is, what's been going on for a long time, but of course this buildup is only going to, increase tensions, and the fact that we have Antony Blinken going over there, likely making more promises, say, to the Philippines, in maybe Vietnam and some of these other countries. And the goal, of course, is going to be to get them to agree and say, oh, yeah, we're going to flaunt our claims in the face of China and likely stir up tensions. The U.S. will promise, oh, we'll do all this, that, and the other for you when that happens. But Connor, that likely won't happen. And at best, it'll be a Ukraine situation where maybe we'll help supply some weapons to these countries, to confront China. But there's no way we'll actually fight a war on behalf of Vietnam or the Philippines against China. And so we're just pushing them into an untenable situation. It's a really terrible situation and is likely only going to get worse to come. But Connor, now I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you got some news on the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, to start with, we've got a bunch of news on Israel today. So the U.S. is getting ready to provide billions of dollars more in military aid to Israel. Well, at least it's covered from the previous memorandum of understanding, but we're going to be giving them $3 billion worth of F-35s. So this is from Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com on July 2nd. Israel to get new fleet of F-35s financed by U.S. aid. So the Israeli Defense Ministry said Sunday that Israel will acquire a third fleet of Lockheed Martin-made F-35 fighter jets using U.S. military aid funds. The deal for 25 F-35 fighter jets is estimated to cost about $3 billion and will be purchased through foreign military financing, the U.S. State Department program that gives foreign governments money to purchase U.S. arms. Now, the Israeli arms industry will also benefit from the deal. The Israeli Defense Ministry said that as part of the agreement, Lockheed Martin and the engine manufacturer Pratt & Whitney have, quote, committed to involving Israeli defense industries in the production of aircraft components sold. They also said this new agreement will ensure the continuation of cooperation between American companies and Israeli defense industries in the production of aircraft parts. Now, the U.S. and Israel signed this memorandum of understanding in 2016 under Barack Obama that gives Israel $33 billion in foreign military financing plus another $5 billion in aid for missile defense systems over 10 years. The memorandum of understanding covers fiscal year 2019 to 2028, giving Israel $3.8 billion in military aid annually. But they've been given $1 billion on top of that in 2022 to go toward the Iron Dome missile defense system, which they claim needed to be replenished after the massive bombing campaign in Gaza in May of 2021. Israel requested another $1 billion in additional aid following that attack on Gaza, which killed 256 Palestinians, including 67 children. Okay, so we have some more news on Iran here as well. This is interesting. This is from the Cradle from July 1st. And this is the national security minister of Israel, who's Chaki Hanegbi, former settlement minister, Likudnik minister, who's very close to Netanyahu and extremely hawkish on Iran, and has publicly made several threats that Israel will go to war with Iran if Biden even attempts to return to the JCPOA and things like this. Now, he is saying, this article is from the Cradle. It's called "Israel Backs Down on Threats to Bomb Iranian Nuclear Sites." So the article says Israel is not planning to attack Iran's nuclear sites. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's national security advisor said on June 30th. Excuse me, he's the national security advisor, not the minister. So as indirect talks between Tehran and Washington regarding the nuclear issue have continued during recent weeks. So asked whether an Israeli decision on a preemptive strike against Iran was any closer, Chaki Hanegbi said, "We are not getting closer because the Iranians have stopped for a while now. They are not enriching uranium to the level that is, in our view, is the red line." Now, this is interesting because the Iranians have not attempted to enrich to 90%, which is the minimum needed for weapons-grade uranium. But of course, the Israelis... the facts don't matter when they're talking about Iran. So then Hanegbi adds, but it can happen, so we are preparing for the moment. So for several decades, Israel and the U.S. have accused Iran of being weeks away from building a nuclear weapon. However, Iran maintains that its nuclear industry is for peaceful purposes, which has been verified, of course, by the IAEA for decades, including, it's their civilian energy program, and has stressed that, or including energy, and has stressed that Islam forbids pursuing weapons of mass destruction. Now, Hanegbi said it was still unclear what would come of the U.S.-Iran talks. Still, he insisted that if an agreement is signed between Israel's primary sponsor and main enemy during the indirect talks that began in Oman, this will not obligate Israel to abide by it. And he's echoing Netanyahu here, who has said that no deal that the U.S. makes with Iran will tie Israel's hands, that they can still go ahead and start a war and unilaterally attack Iran and or whether it's their nuclear sites or some other target. Now, last week, Netanyahu said at a cabinet meeting that Israel opposes any interim agreement between the U.S. and Iran regarding the latter's nuclear program. Of course, Israel opposed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was signed in 2015 and celebrated when Donald Trump illegally withdrew from the deal in 2018. The deal limited Iranian uranium enrichment to 3.67%. And after the U.S. withdrew from the agreement and Israel had carried out myriad attacks on Iran's nuclear program, including at the Natanz uranium enrichment facility in the midst of an continually expanding economic war led by the U.S., Iran began enriching to 60% uranium after the April 2021 attack on the Natanz facility, which is, again, still well below the 90% weapons grade level. Now, Netanyahu also said recently that we also tell the U.S. that even mini agreements, in our opinion, do not serve our goals, and we oppose those as well. But at the same time, we have U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan reportedly accusing Israeli officials of leaking information about the indirect U.S.-Iran talks while complaining that information that was leaked was inaccurate. And this included claims that the Biden administration seeks to reach an informal deal with Iran, limiting its nuclear enrichment to bypass congressional approval. According to the New York Times, the U.S. seeks an agreement that would include a pledge by Tehran not to enrich uranium beyond 60% purity, to better cooperate with the UN nuclear inspectors, which we've been seeing has actually been happening in recent months, and to stop attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. The best way to do that would be for the U.S. to get out of Iraq and Syria and to stop bombing Iran's allies and other people in Syria, especially. Now, to avoid providing, they are also saying to avoid providing Russia with ballistic missiles and to release 3 American Iranians held in the Islamic Republic. In exchange, the U.S. would release billions of dollars in seized Iranian funds and commit not to oppose additional sanctions and not to take action against Iran in international forums such as the UN and IAEA. That last part is pretty interesting because the U.S. has an ability to lean on the IAEA and to politicize the UN nuclear watchdog in a way where for the longest time they were just refusing to accept Iran's explanations on things like the so-called undeclared sites where these unprocessed trace particles of uranium had been found, and also especially that issue is one that was used for a very long time to thwart diplomacy whenever it looked like things were going Iran's way. But in the last couple of months, especially after that report was revealed in the AP, that IAEA report that showed that Iran and the IAEA were working together to basically resolve some of these outstanding inquiries, that was a sign that it looks like to me that the U.S. was letting them know that, okay, you can go ahead and kind of start wrapping some of this up. We don't really care about it as much anymore. We're trying to, it lends some more credibility to these reports about indirect and direct talks regarding an interim deal on the nuclear program. Which is the one we're discussing here with the limited sanctions relief in exchange for Iran not exceeding that 60% level, which they've, of course, already pledged that they won't do, regardless of what the U.S. does. Okay. Now, this next piece I wrote for the Institute on July 3rd, and this is Mike Pence and other prominent hawks back regime change in Iran at MEK rally. And this is about the Mujahideen cult, Marxist Islamist cult. And so I write that former Vice President Mike Pence participated in a rally outside of Paris led by the exiled Iranian terrorist cult, the Marxist Islamist Mujahideen cult, which is headed by Maryam Rajavi, and their political front, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, over at the time it was over the weekend. Now, Pence, who is still a current GOP presidential hopeful, along with a host of other prominent hawks, including British ex-Prime Minister Liz Truss, as well as former CIA Director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, made calls for regime change in Tehran and railed against engagement with the Islamic Republic during the rally. Pence said, quote, "One of the biggest lies the ruling regime has sold to the world is that there is no alternative," adding, "No oppressive regime can last forever." Truss declared, "Authoritarian regimes have been emboldened as the free world has not done enough. I will never give up hope for a free and democratic Iran. Democracy is under threat around the world. Now is the time to turn our backs on accommodation and appeasement." Pompeo chimed in via video link, proclaiming that any deal tolerating Iran's nuclear energy program would be a calamity for the Iranian people and the world. Now, per the National Council for Resistance of Iran, also in attendance at the event were former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark and erstwhile U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, who is I believe the chairman of United Against a Nuclear Iran, which is sort of a think tank set up, funded by the Adelson empire, Sheldon Adelson and his wife, Miriam, the late Sheldon Adelson, ultra-Zionist billionaire, and also Jeb Bush and John Bolton work with that same group. Now, these condemnations of diplomacy, of course, come as the White House is making these efforts reportedly to de-escalate tensions with Iran in an attempt to secure an interim nuclear deal. The new understanding would see Iran, as we said earlier, cap its enrichment at 60% purity in exchange for this limited sanctions relief. Tehran is, of course, as I said, pledged that they won't exceed 60% anyways. So it's not clear Iran has to do all that much. And they're only enriching to 60%. With that uranium hexafluoride to gain leverage at the negotiating table. And this was, of course, after the attack on Natanz, which damaged centrifuges, caused an explosion and power outages. So a Western official recently told Reuters that Washington is seeking the alternative agreement because Israel may launch a military assault against Iran, a potential escalation which the Joe Biden administration until now had repeatedly greenlighted. And I only say until now because they haven't said it much since these reports started to come out. Which is notable in and of itself. But in May, The Intercept reported that according to the Discord leaks, even the CIA is unsure whether Israel is truly preparing to unilaterally launch a war against Iran. Such a conflict would, of course, spread violently across the region and quickly draw in the United States by design. Now, during previous years, Israel and the MEK cult, who were trained, funded, and armed by the Mossad, have collaborated on the extrajudicial execution and assassination of several Iranian nuclear scientists. By likely working with the terrorist group, Tel Aviv assassinated infamously the Iranian scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh outside of Tehran in November 2020. Both Israel and the MEK were suspected in the May 2022 murder of senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander Colonel Hassan Syed Kodeh, and later a U.S. official confirmed to CNN that Israel was behind that hit. And the later killing touched off an unprecedented wave of assassinations in the country, which targeted members of the IRGC and Iran's aerospace industry. Moreover, investigative journalist Gareth Porter has reported extensively on how the MEK and the Mossad forged documents used to cultivate the propaganda narrative behind the Phantom Iranian nuclear weapons program, which Israel alleges was once headed by Fakhrizadeh. Now, the MEK lacks any support inside Iran, particularly after having murdered dozens of Iranian officials and having allied with Saddam Hussein's forces during the Iran-Iraq war. Nevertheless, Pence once dubbed the group a, quote, perfectly qualified and popularly supported alternative to the Islamic Republic. Now, similarly, in 2017, ultra-hawk John Bolton told an MEK rally, quote, there is a viable opposition to the rule of the Ayatollahs, and that opposition is centered in this room today. The behavior and objectives of the regime are not going to change, and therefore the only solution is to change the regime itself. Now, Bolton, among other U.S. political figures like Rudy Giuliani, are paid handsomely for speaking at the terrorist cult's events. So this is from The Guardian in 2018. They say estimates are in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 per speech. Bolton is estimated to have received upwards of $180,000 to speak at multiple events for MEK. His recent financial disclosure shows that he was paid $40,000 for one speech at an MEK event last year. And again, that's from a Guardian report in 2018. Now, as foreign policy analyst and antiwar.com contributing editor Daniel Larison has written, this is just highlighting the absurdity and the corruption of these American officials, even feigning that this is first of all, supporting regime change in Tehran and all the of course, consequences of such a policy and what that would actually entail. But let alone all of that, actually suggesting the MEK as a viable option to take power in Iran. Larison says this is a group that has American blood on its hands, and it routinely abuses its own members. It is an oppressive and fanatical organization. It would be a nightmare if it ever managed to gain power over a larger population. There is a reason it has sometimes been likened to the Khmer Rouge. And Larison links and I link to all kinds of reports that have come out about the brainwashing, physical abuse, and cult psychological almost torture that is done on the members of the group. It's pretty shocking stuff. Now, the group's base headquarters in Albania was recently raided by security police for unsanctioned activity being carried out at the camp in contravention of a U.S. mediated deal. The agreement had allowed the MEK to relocate to the Balkan country as they were no longer welcome in Iraq once Hussein was removed from power following the U.S. invasion. However, according to responsible statecraft, the cult was reportedly using their presence in Albania as a base for political activities, including, at the very least, cyber attacks directed against third countries, presumably Iran, and mass online trolling and harassment of the group's many opponents. The outlet also notes that post-Saudi Iran rapprochement, Rajavi's funding may be drying up as well, as Riyadh was long suspected of being one of the MEK's major benefactors. Okay, now moving on to this brutal invasion of Jenin, the northern Palestinian city and refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. This is report is from Middle East Eye. Jenin, 8 Palestinians killed as Israel bombs West Bank city in large offensive. So thousands of Palestinian civilians were streaming out of Jenin in the occupied West Bank late on Monday night local time as the refugee camp braced for a new night of assaults with Israeli military reinforcements reportedly streaming to the city. Israeli drones and Apache attack helicopters in coordination with ground forces, attacked Jenin on Monday morning. At least 8 Palestinians were killed, including 3 children and 50 wounded, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Those numbers, the death toll went up, but these reports came out in the midst of the invasion and the assault. 4 were killed from gunshot wounds, and at least 3 died in airstrikes. The ministry said the number of casualties was likely to rise because there was a high number of critical injuries and because Israeli army bulldozers were blocking paramedics from reaching some areas. An official at the Jenin government hospital said the attack was the worst in years, adding, "We have not received this number of serious injuries since 2002. The attack prompted condemnation from the Arab and Muslim majority world, with Egypt, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates all criticizing Israel's actions." Lynn Hastings, UN humanitarian coordinator in Palestine, said she was, quote, "alarmed by the scale of the Israeli forces operation in Jenin." Airstrikes were used in the densely populated refugee camp. Several dead and critically wounded. Access to all injured must be ensured, she said on Twitter. Later in the day, a UN spokesperson told reporters it is not acceptable for there to be armed attacks in areas of high population density when asked about the drone strikes. A local resident told Middle East Eye that the building shell belonged to civilians and included the Freedom Theater, a popular cultural center in the city. Mahmoud al-Saidi, director of the Palestinian Red Crescent in Jenin, told AFP that there was bombing from the air and invasion from the ground. Several houses and sites have been bombed. Smoke is rising from everywhere. Hafte Abu Sabra, an eyewitness from the Jenin refugee camp, described scenes of horror in the city street. He said Israeli forces were destroying infrastructure and public property as snipers were stationed inside armored vehicles as well as on rooftops, firing live rounds at unarmed Palestinians standing near the camp's entrance. 2 civilians were directly hit in front of me, Abu Sabra told Middle East Eye, as the sound of sniper gunshots were heard in the background during the interview. He just stood and wasn't doing anything. He was not armed, and he wasn't even throwing rocks at the armored vehicles, Abu Sabra said. He added that the camp's entrances and alleyways are besieged from every direction, making movement very difficult for civilians stuck inside. Al-Amal Hospital in Jenin was targeted during the Israeli offensive as well, with videos shared online showing the hospital's shattered windows, an apparent result of gunfire. The military also stormed Jenin's Al-Ansar Mosque after claiming that armed men were holed up inside of it. Paramedics are trying to reach some neighborhoods that were targeted with Israeli fire. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said journalists with the Al Arabi TV channel also came under fire, leaving some of their equipment damaged. The Al Arabi TV team was targeted and shots were fired at their camera and their live broadcast device while they were covering the storming of Jenin. So then Netanyahu in the midst of all this, Netanyahu praises his security ties with the U.S. and his American backing for a deadly attack, saying it demonstrates that, quote, security cooperation with the U.S. has never been better. Earlier in the morning, the Israeli military said in a statement that it was conducting a focused and extensive counterterrorism effort in the Jenin area. A military source said that more than 1,000 soldiers were involved in the operation from various departments, including members of the Army and the Air Force, according to an Israeli news website, Walla. The Jenin Brigades, the most prominent armed group in the city, established in 2021, said in a statement that they were responding with a counter operation aimed at stopping the Israeli advance. So there were heavy armed clashes and large blasts that were heard throughout Jenin, including in the refugee camp as Israeli troops encircled the area. Several explosive devices planted by Palestinians were detonated, targeting Israeli army vehicles. At least 1 soldier was wounded from grenade shrapnel at that time, according to the military. Israeli military. Local media said Israeli armored bulldozers were advancing towards the Jenin refugee camp, tearing apart the streets to clear them of potential bombs planted on roadsides. Some Israeli tanks were spotted on the outskirts of Jenin. Unarmed civilians also took to the streets to confront Israeli troops burning tires and throwing stones at army vehicles. A correspondent for Middle East Eye in Jenin said current scenes are reminiscent of the 2002 Israeli invasion of the city at the height of the Second Intifada, which killed dozens of Palestinians and left wide-scale destruction. Palestinian factions condemned the operation on Monday and said Israel bears responsibility for the escalation. And then the Palestinian Joint Command, an umbrella body of armed factions in Gaza, released their statement saying the Palestinian resistance everywhere will not allow Israel to isolate Jenin in its aggression. The nature of Palestinians' resistance response will be determined by the conduct of the occupation and the scale of the operation, it said in a statement. According to Israeli Army radio, the military had deployed Iron Dome batteries in preparation for possible rockets from Gaza or Lebanon. Palestinian presidential spokesperson Nabil Abu Rudineh said in a statement that Israel was committing a new war crime against our defenseless people. Jenin's deputy governor, Kamal Abu el-Rab, said Palestinians are the rightful owners of this land and therefore they have the right to defend themselves against Israeli aggression. He said the will of the Palestinian people will always be bigger than the crimes of the Israeli occupation. And then commenting on the operation, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, said, "We will take an offensive approach against terrorism. Anyone who harms the citizens of Israel will pay a heavy price." For the past 2 years, Israel has increased its deadly raids on Jenin, killing more than 100 Palestinians from the city since 2022. The latest raid 2 weeks ago killed 2 weeks before this. Actually, there have been multiple invasions of Jenin this year. The latest raid 2 weeks ago killed at least 6 people. But faced fierce resistance from the Palestinians, forcing the military to deploy Apache attack helicopters to evacuate army vehicles stuck for hours in an ambush set by local fighters. 2 days later, an Israeli drone killed 3 Palestinians near Jenin in the first aerial attack in the occupied West Bank in nearly 20 years. The Jenin camp, which lies at the heart of the city, is a half a square kilometer in size and home to some 13,000 refugees. And so in 2002, Israel launched a 10-day military campaign in the city that killed at least 52 Palestinians, laying waste to the camp and destroying hundreds of civilian homes and displacing thousands of people. Tariq Saeed, a journalist from Jenin, said, "While the scale of today's operation is the biggest since then, the situation is slightly different than it was during the Second Intifada. In 2002, Israel knew that invading would lead to the collapse of the Palestinian Authority, and at the time it wanted to eliminate the PA because it considered that Yasser Arafat was part of the resistance. Nowadays, however, Israel is not interested in the collapse of the PA." And Zaid added that Palestinian resistance in Gaza and Lebanon must also be part of the Israeli calculations when determining the scale of attacks in Jenin. The Israeli government wants to get rid of Palestinians, but they can't just do what they want, as there is a consideration of the resistance in Gaza, which would make them think hard before taking a step that might incite that front. So as far as the U.S. green light and support for this mass murder that's ongoing with the apartheid army, this piece is from Dave DeCamp on July 3rd. U.S. backs Israel's major offensive in West Bank city of Jenin. So Dave wrote, "The White House has expressed support for a major Israeli offensive that was launched against the occupied West Bank city of Jenin early Monday. This is a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council saying, according to AFP, "We support Israel's security and right to defend its people against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups." Amid the ongoing raid, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu touted U.S. support for Israel, which includes that $3.8 billion in annual military aid. He said, "America's provided Israel with moral and political backing against those who would wipe us out, the only Jewish state." The Netanyahu government has significantly stepped up raids in the West Bank since taking power at the end of December. The government includes extremist settlers, and the coalition has vowed to prioritize expanding settlements in the West Bank with the ultimate goal of annexing the territory. The policies have sparked more Palestinian resistance, of course. And according to Al Jazeera, it wasn't only 1,000 Israeli troops that were involved in the attack, but 150 armored vehicles and air power. The Israeli military said Monday that they launched around 20 drone strikes across Jenin and vowed that the operation would last longer than 1 day. Palestinian authorities reported that at that time, after the first day of attacks, that at least 8 Palestinians had been killed in the offensive, which had been described as the worst attack on the city since 2002. According to the Defense for Children International Palestine, 2 of those killed were children. Israel launched the offensive ostensibly to root out armed resistance groups in Jenin, but the city's mayor said civilians are being killed. Those being targeted now are not just the resistance fighters, but civilians are being killed, and civilians are being wounded as well. Nidal Obedi told Al Jazeera. So, on the topic of just the vast destruction of civilian infrastructure in this attack deliberately. There's a piece from Middle East Eye called Jenin under attack. Israel bulldozers plow streets and destroy infrastructure. And so this Middle East Eye writes on July 4th, residents of the Jenin refugee camp have been left stunned by the sheer extent of the destruction left in the wake of the Israeli raid, which struck the occupied West Bank neighborhood in the past few days. Mohammed Abu Talal, a resident of the camp, told Middle East Eye that Israeli bulldozers leveled most of the streets surrounding the camp from the moment they first stormed in on Monday morning. Piles of rubble were left mounded around the edges of the roads after the bulldozers were finished, in addition to the destruction of the camp's infrastructure with water and electricity networks left ruined. They said, he added, most of our homes were cut off from electricity at the beginning of the invasion. We saw many water pipes exploded from under the streets, which were bulldozed and destroyed. A number of witnesses to the Israeli raid, which at this point, and again, the number went up, but which had at that point had killed 10 Palestinians. A number of witnesses said that it brought back memories of Operation Defensive Shield in 2002, again during the Second Intifada, the massive Israeli operation that targeted Palestinian groups in the West Bank and saw hundreds killed, including many of which were in Jenin. Dozens of military vehicles and hundreds of Israeli soldiers began storming the camp and many adjacent areas in the early morning hours of Monday under heavy cover from helicopters that bombed several targets. Palestinians in the camp said their streets looked plowed after the bulldozers had gone. When the darkness cleared and Monday's sun lit up the area, it became clear that everything had changed. The camp streets are all dug up and uprooted, Abu Talal said. Bulldozers have left nothing as it is here. They turned our streets into crumbs. The municipality of Jenin announced in a brief statement that Israeli military vehicles had destroyed the main water lines in the camp and its surroundings. Israeli soldiers prevented the municipality crews from working in the affected places or even reaching them to assess the damage. The statement said, please rationalize water consumption and preserve the quantities available to you. We appeal to you to preserve what you have of your household supplies due to the occupation forces besieging the city and its camp. The destruction was not only limited to streets, water, and electricity networks, but extended to homes, residential buildings, and even hospitals and mosques. Telephone lines were destroyed and the internet. The aim is to prevent communication with the camp and isolate it from the outside world. That's a Jenin resident named Sari Samour speaking. The Twalabe Mosque, apologize for a mispronunciation, in the center of the camp was severely damaged as a result of this bombardment. Its windows were shattered, its doors were damaged amid threats to bomb it from warplanes. Sari Samour, a resident of one of the neighborhoods adjacent to the camp, said that at 7 a.m. an Israeli bulldozer leveled the street near the mosque. He explained that the street was bulldozed several times so that it was no longer suitable for vehicle use at all. Residential buildings were so severely damaged that Israeli soldiers made large holes in the walls of the houses for snipers to position themselves and shoot through, according to Samour. Al-Amal Hospital and Dr. Khalil Suleiman Hospital were exposed to direct fire from Israeli soldiers with heavy weapons, which damaged many of their facilities. The Israeli army claimed that these actions were aimed at detonating explosive devices planted by Palestinians in the streets and in homes. That's what the ostensible purpose of the operation was. The Palestine Red Crescent Society said in a statement that its crews had evacuated 5 families since that morning from homes damaged by the bombing, and they were working to evacuate women and children from the homes immediately. A journalist from Jenin, Yasmin Hantoli, said the structure of the camp was already weak due to the density of the population and the large number of adjoining houses, and that the Israeli occupation forces deliberately struck several populated areas in the Jenin camp. So this is written on the 5th, again from Middle East Eye. Jenin buries its dead and inspects destruction left by Israel's aggression. And this is after Israel pulled out of the camp in the city. So Palestinian residents of Jenin woke up to scenes of widespread destruction in the occupied West Bank city after Israeli troops ended their 48-hour aerial and ground aggression. After thousands of people were forcibly displaced during the fighting, returned to inspect the damage, Crowds joined the funeral processions of the boys and young men killed by the Israeli army since Monday. The Palestinian Health Ministry said that 12 people, including 5 children, have been killed in 2 days, some from gunshot wounds and others as a result of the airstrikes. At least 120 others were wounded, and 20 of whom were in critical condition. The Israeli army said 1 soldier was killed in the assault. At the funerals, defiant crowds chanted support for armed resistance groups in the camp who fought fierce street battles with Israeli soldiers for 2 days. The Jenin brigades and the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, the armed branch of Hamas, released statements saying that the Israeli army had failed to achieve any meaningful goals of the operation and was stopped from advancing deep into the camp. Some fighters from the various armed groups operating in Jenin emerged at the processions and burials, paying their respects to the dead. The alleyways of the camp, which was under siege for 2 days, bore the scars of widespread devastation of homes and basic public services, and columns of smoke have been visible over the camp since Monday. And as the operation wound down, Netanyahu declared that these operations would not be a one-time action. He's already done it, well, not on this scale, but invaded the city and the camp multiple times this year. And meanwhile, Vanessa Hugenin, a spokesperson for the UN humanitarian office, said we are alarmed at the scale of air and ground operations taking place in Jenin and the occupied West Bank, and airstrikes hitting this densely populated refugee camp. So as Israeli troops left on Tuesday night, bringing an end to one of the largest operations in the West Bank in 2 decades, several rockets were fired from Gaza. So Israel bombed several sites in the besieged open-air concentration camp of Gaza. And no injuries at that time have been reported on either side. And then, Kyle, as you reported, or you covered earlier on the show on last Friday, Israel was also bombing Syria in the midst of all this. So, I think there's some great pieces I recommend people read from Ramsey Baroud at antiwar.com about how historically Jenin has been really the heartbeat of the Palestinian resistance against the brutal occupation of the Israelis. And so they know that they can't crush the resistance in Jenin, but they like to go in there and really just destroy the place to really send a message to all other factions. It's a history of brutality against these people, but their courage is really quite inspiring. On the other hand, you have Netanyahu bombing. He's already bombed Lebanon this year, bombed Syria almost 20 times this year at this point, conducted drone strikes in Iran. They may be tamping down, as we said earlier, some of this rhetoric about Iran, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some escalations here coming up soon with Gaza or again in the West Bank. The Israelis are, I think Netanyahu, especially with his political concerns and his corruption trial, have to cover some more stuff on the judicial overhaul and some of the changes, demands that he's dropped, like the simple majority veto on any sort of, in the Knesset, of any sort of rulings from the Israeli Supreme Court that may somewhat diminish some of the pressure that he has right now with his planned judicial overhaul, but it's not clear yet. And of course, he's got every incentive with the way the Israelis are to go ahead and start another war. And it looks like over the weekend there have been more Palestinians who've been killed in the West Bank, and they're getting closer. I believe nearly 200 Palestinians have been killed already this year.
All right, Connor, thank you so much for the update. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. There may be one more show this week, but again, if you are in Memphis, come hang out with us at Freedom Fest. Thanks,
yeah, please.
Connor.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everybody.